like, some people call me Patient X because I'm like the first person to be written up about it.
Hmm.
I'm also the only person in the planet that I know of who got my brain waves read in an fMRI machine while daydreaming. And the results of that were interesting.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. I am your host, Todd Runnebaum. Thank you so much for tuning in for another week. This is a really great episode. I say that every week, and I'm right every week. This one's about maladaptive daydreaming, and that is basically addiction to daydreaming. And my guest is Jayne Bigelsen. She is actually a pioneer in maladaptive daydreaming, and there's been studies done on her and papers written on her, and she's the first one to work with the doctor that came up with the term maladaptive daydreaming. So it's pretty cool that we get to hear from her and speak to her. So thank you so much for that, Jayne. After the interview, I'd love if you would stick around and listen, keep listening. I've got a very, very cool story to tell you, and it would mean a lot if you tuned in for that. Quickly, next week, I'm speaking with Pam with Teens Talk YXE. She's an advocate, and she's the creator of a Teens Talk a mental health group. She also has a daughter, Taryn, and Taryn is extremely ill with mental illness, and she's having a real hard time finding answers. Her daughter's in and out of the psych ward constantly because she keeps self-harming, and sometimes it's in very bizarre ways, from eating weird things to just trying to harm herself in really strange ways. And she is it's almost like she's has a compulsion with it. Friends of hers started a GoFundMe to try to get her to fly to LA for brain scans for her daughter to really try and figure out what the hell's going on. Yeah, we're going to talk to Pam next week. And I have to be honest, I have so many incredible guests lined up coming up in the future. Some of them are recorded already. A lot of them aren't yet, but so I don't want to give those away quite yet, just in case something happens. But I'm really, really excited for the future and for the future of the podcast here. There's some really cool stuff happening, and every week I keep getting incredible letters of people that are finding some kind of solace with the podcast, whether it's with a guest or because we covered some kind of subject, whatever. So that's really amazing. That's really, really cool. Anyway, my guest, Jayne Bigelsen. She is in New York. She also has a really cool day job, which she'll briefly talk about. But anyway, it's about maladaptive daydreaming. So without further ado, I give you Jayne Bigelsen.
So for my day job has nothing to do with any of this. I'm a public interest attorney, although these days I work more as a social worker. I work in nonprofit management. I work with young adults who are experiencing homelessness and human trafficking. And that's my main day job and line of work. But where maladaptive daydreaming comes in is it's something I experienced since very young childhood, all the way through my mid-20s. I'm 52 now, but so the first half of my life, I experienced it, went to doctors and therapists, all said there's no such thing, tried to find friends, other people. Everybody said that didn't know what I was talking about. I mean, I wasn't daydreaming. I was looking up information about daydreaming, and I got nowhere. And then around age 26, after doctor blew me up, one doctor was like, I never heard of this, but let's look at what else is in your family. And there was a decent amount of OCD in my family. So he's like, let's just try you an SSRI for OCD. And it really worked. Within 6 weeks, I had it under control, and I really kind of put it away. It was not something that was part of my life anymore. But that was when the internet was starting to expand. And then I did some research, and all of a sudden I found hundreds and hundreds of people. And, all my life there was there's no such thing. And there on the internet, there's hundreds of people with the same symptoms. So from that point, I took that. I printed that out, took it to my doctor, asked him to write me up as a case study, which he did. It was anonymous, but I'm like the first case study ever on maladaptive daydreaming. And then I went back to psych grad school and I worked with a professor who he's known for coining the term maladaptive daydreaming. And we worked together on, his name is Dr. Ellie Somer. We worked together on a couple papers. So I ended up researching, I think I'm on 3 papers now, minus the case study, which doesn't have my name. But then they continued to research. I decided I wasn't much of a researcher and went back to my other job, but I'm still vocal about the need for maladaptive daydreaming to get recognized. So I still talk to people about it.
Hmm.
That's me in a nutshell.
Well, I didn't realize you were kind of a pioneer in this then.
I'm like, some people call me Patient X because I'm like the first person to be written up about it.
Hmm.
I'm also the only person in the planet that I know of who got my brain waves read in an fMRI machine while daydreaming. And the results of that were interesting. So it would be great if more people could do that, but it's crazy, uberly expensive. And I just had one researcher who had a grant to take a look at it, but there's never been one done since.
So what was fascinating about it?
So it was funny because the researcher who was doing it was looking at a concept called mind wandering, which basically is like any off task thought. So, right. So it would be like, you're out to dinner and instead of thinking about the person that you're talking to, you're thinking about what do I have to do when I get home?
I've
Right.
ADHD, so I know that well.
Right. Like you're just thinking about, like we all kind of do it,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
as far as what do I have to do tomorrow? Wishing I could tell off my boss, like all of that, it's off task thinking. And apparently, like humans spend 96% of their life doing that. So it's hard to say that anybody really can wander too much, which was interesting. So when my case study first came out, we heard a lot of feedback saying, you should not medicate this. Everybody mind wanders. There's no such thing as mind wandering too much. But then when the researcher put me in that fMRI machine, she put me in the machine and she said, okay, daydream now, stop daydreaming, daydream now. And what was interesting is she was expecting a lot of mind wandering during the daydreaming piece. No, my mind wandering was when she told me not to daydream, right?
Hmm.
Because that when I'm not, when I'm not doing a daydream, what am I doing? I'm thinking about like what I'm going to eat tomorrow or whatever. And then when she told me the daydreaming, it looked very different from mind wandering. It was like purposeful, like thought, constructive thought. And she said that the same areas of the brain that would light up when you show a picture of heroin to a heroin addict showed up while I was daydreaming. So that's some evidence that it could be an addiction and that it's different from regular daydreamers. Since they have no control group, we don't know what other people would a person who doesn't have MD, what they would look like if they were daydreaming. It doesn't tell us as much as we need, and it would be amazing if we could have a lot more of those studies, but that's the only one that I know of at this point, mostly because it's extremely expensive.
So did maladaptive daydreaming, so it's considered, is it in the DSM-5 actually?
It is not. And I mean, and
Oh.
that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this advocacy is because it's still not recognized. So when I was a kid, no one even there was no such thing. But in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, there's now a hefty line of research, right? Thanks to Dr. Somer, because it's very hard to get something new recognized. And I learned that when I was trying to get my first 2 articles on maladaptive daydreaming published. Like they want you to use scientifically validated tools on a scientifically validated sample. Like, how do you have something that's scientifically validated for something that you don't know that it exists, right? So, my professors, I wanted to go to these websites because these websites were full of now hundreds, thousands of people all saying what I said. Like, we have these imaginary daydream worlds filled with fantasy. Sometimes characters taken from TV, movies. Sometimes they make it up themselves. We don't get them confused with reality.
Mm-hmm.
But we feel like we're addicted to them. And a lot of them would move, pace, found that moving for whatever reason facilitated it, which is what I did as a child. But before that time, nothing about maladaptive daydreaming. now, because of Dr. Sommer's research and that I helped with on some of them, there is a line, I think there's at least 59 articles by like peer-reviewed articles on maladaptive daydreaming. What it takes to get something in the DSM, I do not know. I really do not know. It's somewhat political. And as of now, it's not there, which drives me crazy because what that means is if someone tries to go get help, sometimes they get lucky and they get someone who's willing to Google and be like, oh yeah, this is a thing. But if you're dealing with like particularly psychiatrists who don't, they don't want to look at Google, they're like, nope, it's not in the DSM. They'll tell them there's no such thing, right? I mean, it's not taught in any medical school class. It's not taught in any abnormal psychology class because it's not in the DSM. And so one of the things that absolutely drives me bonkers is, I don't know, about a year ago, the Wall Street Journal released an article that said young girls were dangerously diagnosing themselves with rare mental health disorders on TikTok. And of course, that's not a good thing, right? That's not ideal. And that was picked up like all over the news media. But what pisses me off is if a parent of one of those kids, right, did the right thing, their parents said, the kid said, oh my God, I saw this on TikTok. I think I have it. If the parent did the right thing and takes them to a doctor or a therapist, the therapist may very well say, there's no such thing. Don't believe everything you hear on TikTok. And at the moment, like I'm on TikTok, Dr. Sommer's on TikTok, like there is more like evidence-based knowledge on TikTok than there might be in a doctor's office. So it just drives me crazy because doctors won't use these websites, right? Doctors should be the ones seeing that hundreds of thousands of people have these same symptoms.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I've had depression, anxiety, and addiction and stuff all my life. I've battled those symptoms of ADHD. Turns out I've only been diagnosed a little while, and it was partly because of TikTok. People talking about some of the symptoms and stuff, and I was like, "What?" Like I thought it was just the hyper kid in school or whatever, and it was like, "Wait a minute, what?"
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, there's some real information on TikTok. There really is. And the hard part is how do you sort out what's real and what's not? But I envision like if researchers and doctors didn't look at these sites and say they're garbage and instead said, ooh, let's like try to get some research ideas and study it. That would be so much better for patients because today we're here talking about the mental health piece, but I've also had some physical health pieces, and I do think they're in some way all related. I think that the daydreaming might have been a way to cope with my undiagnosed medical illnesses, which turned out to be autoimmune disease. But 3 times in my life, doctors are like, nope, nothing's wrong with you. You go on the internet, thousands of people have similar symptoms. And then, you have to beg a doctor to test you for it. And you're right, like the internet chat rooms has like literally saved my life in more than one instant.
So is maladaptive daydreaming, do you think it's caused by, because a lot of kind of disorders and stuff, it's caused by traumas and maybe, I don't know, what am I trying to say? I guess traumas or like being raised, your parents cause these things in your brain or whatever, these belief systems.
Everybody blames the parents for everything. And sometimes they're at fault, but sometimes they're not. In my case, they're not. I think the initial theory, so Dr. Sommer, he's a researcher out of Israel, and he coined the term maladaptive daydreaming. Mm-hmm. He wrote the first article, and his article was like a group case study of 6 people in his trauma practice, because that's what he specialized in, trauma. So he had 6 patients who severe trauma and abuse, right? And maladaptive daydreaming is a spectrum. Like I believe those 6 people like couldn't function, right? Like no real life relationships, not an ability to hold on to a job. So his first theory was that trauma, particularly child abuse, or maybe other extreme trauma, led to maladaptive daydreaming. But I actually reached out to him when I found that, this is really funny, we were just talking about it recently, me and Dr. Sommer and I, when I found that like first chat room about maladaptive daydreaming. Like again, at the beginning of the internet, I don't think there was Facebook or anything. It was on an Indian parenting chat room. When I first found that, I started doing some research, and that's when I found Dr. Sommer's article. So I reached out to him. Now, this was when I was like mid 30s. I was, in career in public policy. Mental health was not as destigmatized, and I did not want anyone to know this about me. So I reached out to Dr. Sommer using a fake name, and I emailed him and said, look, I read your article. I, did not experience the type of abuse and trauma that you're describing in your article. And I don't have the amount of dysfunction that the people in your article have. But there's a lot of other things in your article that ring true to me. And one of them was the movement, right? Because a lot of people with MD, for reasons we don't even know, to me, I think it helps just get you in a trance stage. So you're like, some people pace back and forth. Some people, like, I would shake my fingers. I would, people rock back and forth. Just kind of like, it kind of looks like stimming and autism, but it really like helps get you in the daydream world. So that all of his 6 patients had. And that was the first time I saw a relationship between imagination and that. So I wrote to him. I said, your patients definitely seem different from me, but there seems to be some element of truth in that. And then he tried to post on that. I showed him the website. He thought it was fascinating. He tried to post on it, and he continued his research from there. Years later, I reached out to him, or maybe he reached out to me, I don't know, but with my real name, because back then I was in grad school for psychology, not as a patient, and we collaborated together on 2 sets of papers. But anyway, I digress. So the question was, do you need trauma? So in that first paper, the theory really was that this was caused by extreme trauma and abuse. But after talking to me and after the study, I came out with a study with about 90 something people who thought they had maladaptive daydreaming, and only a third had severe trauma. And that's kind of similar to the population numbers. So what we now believe is that trauma is one pathway to MD, right? But that there are other ways as well. And first of all, you have to define trauma, right?
Right, you're right, yeah.
I mean, some way we all have had trauma, right? Like life is filled with trauma. But, the strict definition of witnessing war or witnessing death in front of you or severe child abuse and, or sexual assault, those are not required. They can lead to MD, but they are not required. So what Dr. Som and I believe are that some people are just born with this ability to create these wonderful imaginary worlds. And for some people, that's not a bad thing, right? I have family members who like to daydream a half hour before they go to bed every night, right? I have one family, 9 to 10 paces across the attic. No one's allowed to talk to him while he in his head talks to famous scientists and politicians. Not a problem, because it's 1 hour a day. Other people are watching TV. It's not affecting his life. But then there's someone like me who could never do that, right? I if I did it for an hour a day, I'd be doing it 24 hours a day, which is what high school was like. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. Anyway, I digress again. Sorry. The point is, what's the pathway to MD? So we just believe some people are born with this trait, which does not have to be a bad thing. But then if you experience trauma or any sort of coexisting conditions, social anxiety, depression, even just loneliness, bullying, anything stressful could increase the chances that your ability to daydream in this way is going to turn maladaptive, right? And in my case, I think there is OCD traits in my family. So I think the ability to imagine in this way plus the OCD together leads to maladaptive daydreaming. And one of the things I want to make clear, because I get so many emails from people being like, oh my God, I daydreamed like this my whole life. I thought I'd never thought it was a problem. I thought it was fun. And now I think there was something wrong with me. No, if you didn't think it was a problem, it's not a problem. people use this to write, to be creative, like it is not a problem. It is only a problem if it affects your real life because you can't focus and concentrate on other things. If it's affecting your real life relationships, if it's affecting your ability to succeed, whether school or work, then it's turned maladaptive. But there's nothing wrong with doing it, occasionally, as long as you're able to limit it.
That was going to be my next question. It's basically that's what the definition of addiction kind of is. If it's disrupting your everyday life, then perhaps it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so I take it like, with a glass of wine, like most people on the planet can enjoy a glass of wine, but for some people, it just becomes too much. And I think that's the same thing with daydreaming. Well, and people will say daydreaming isn't as dangerous as the alcohol. And, that's probably true. But people end up with their whole lives feeling like they never had any real life connection or any real life success, or so that can it really can go over the top.
I suppose then that can feed it. It's like, well, I'm not successful, but I'm an action hero in my story that I tell, and then off you go. Is it usually Is it usually the same story and the same characters and the same, like, you just keep going, or it could be anything, anytime?
So, I hear now from people all over the world. I think because when I wrote the Atlantic article, a lot of people reached out to me. So one thing I know is everybody's different. For me, I would take my favorite TV shows and, I'd have one favorite TV show at a time, and I would just insert another character there. It usually wasn't me, but it was just someone with like traits that maybe I envied.
What show? One of them.
Oh my God, so many, because it started as a very young kid, and I'm probably going to be dating myself.
Happy Days.
Brady Bunch.
Oh,
it started the Brady, but very close. The Brady Bunch, Little House on the Prairie, The Facts of Life. Then in middle school, it was General Hospital. Oh man, that was like I was sitting in class watching a General Hospital episode in my head. In one class, like all of a sudden, I'm like hysterically crying. And everyone's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Holy shit!" Like, yeah. And like I had one of my characters had come back from the dead. So like, yeah. And then it was General Hospital for a long time. And then I got better. But at one point I got off the medication. And then it became the West Wing for a while. But after that, like now I'm on the medication. So like I still daydream, but it could be about a book I read or a movie, but like nothing in the same type of way that I did before. But for people I've talked to, it's one person I talked to has like, she made them all up herself. They're like generations of people in a town, right? Like all people have different occupations. They have different like families, and like, she's a list. It goes back generations.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I would imagine, I don't want to say someone did something without proof, but I think I had read that J.K. Rowling spent years with those Harry Potter characters in her head before writing it. So it's like not necessarily a bad thing, but if this person is spending, one person told me like she had a 3-day daydreaming binge. She saw nothing. She did nothing. She like was in her bed for 3 days. And that's too much. Right. So, I mean, and I always had one show at a time, but I do know some people who switch back and forth between different types of daydreams, different genres. And again, some make their own, some steal plots and characters from TV. You name it.
When I was a teenager, they were usually sexual. But I was in my hormone phase then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't think they're predominantly sexual. Like if someone's doing like if you're
maybe
doing
a scene,
right? Exactly, right. So if you're doing like a 5-generation thing, like some people somewhere are gonna have sex,
right?
But I don't think the ultimate like whatever you're feeding off of is not sex.
Right.
Right.
I think probably most teenagers have like what I was describing. Yes. But when I was a teen, actually, I did have, I would say, OCD type traits. I don't know if they affected my day. I kind of grew out of it because I found alcohol and other things, but daydreaming was a very good way for me to just dissociate at times in the evenings.
Yeah.
Like if I didn't have homework, or even if I did have homework, but if I wasn't going out to meet friends or anything, I would just sit in my bed for like 3 hours and just like bloop and just I'm saving the world from Nazis or whatever I'm doing, and then
Yeah.
the next day I'd have it was again, it was the exact same situation. I would just redo it again and maybe add a bit of detail or something. And
So that's exactly the type of daydream we're talking about. But again, is if you're doing it only like, your homework's done, you have some friends in school, and it's not like, and another kid would have been like playing video games in that time or watching TV in that time, then it's not problematic.
mm-hmm.
And I can know, like, because I know how I was pre-medication and how I am after medication. I don't need as much medication anymore after years and years of it, but they're really, I know what it was before it was out of control and how different it feels now. I can still daydream, right? If I'm going on a long bus ride, and like no one on the planet likes long bus rides but me, and I may even, this is a little tough, like not good. So listeners, don't do what I say. But what if I know I have a long like bus or plane ride coming up, I don't take like my fraction of my medication that I'm on now, so that when I'm on the bus or the plane, I can daydream as much as I want, right? So I still daydream, but it's not like before I got medicated when it was all day, every day. And one of the ways I can really like tell the difference is prior to medication, I have one of my friends and colleagues she'd often want to walk. I live in New York City. She'd want to walk to the subway together. And I didn't want to go with her because walking is like extreme daydreaming time. So I would always make excuses, right? And then like a year or two later, I had been treated and I noticed that I would wait for her, right? Like I'd be like, hey, what time are you leaving? And I would prefer to be with her. And that to me felt really normal. Or even had an experience maybe now a year ago, because it did uptick a little bit in COVID,
Mm-hmm.
but then it leveled off and it's fine now. But about a year ago, I was meeting my niece, who's kind of like a daughter to me, for lunch. And it was a fairly long walk. So I daydreamed. I was in a beautiful daydream on the way to the walk. And prior to like treatment, I would have been disappointed when that walk ended. And I would have been at the table, but I would have run to the bathroom a bunch to try to like, you know, progress the story. I would ask long questions so that like I could pretend to be listening to progress the story. This time, like, yeah, it was a beautiful daydream on the way there. But as soon as I sat down with her, I was with her and I was happy to be there. And I had no interest in checking in on my characters. And when she left and wanted to walk home with me, I was just thrilled and happy. Old me, not so much.
So I didn't realize even when you're conversing with people, you're still daydreaming. You're like you're out for supper with friends. You're like, running to the bathroom to daydream instead of doing a line of Coke or something or some other addiction.
Exactly. And that's what I was like, prior to the age of 25. That is not what I am now. And I do think I make a good spokesperson for this topic. I mean, part of me is like, I've moved on. This was the first half of my life. Like, why do I even like speak about it anymore? But a few reasons. It needs to get into the DSM because it breaks my heart. I'm hearing from people all over the world. And when they muster the courage to go up and get help and they're told, they're laughed at, that breaks my heart. So it needs to get in the DSM. And I think I'm a good spokesperson because I really can talk about the difference of like what it was like having it and what it's like not, because there's not that many people who've like had it and been quote unquote cured from it.
I'd say in recovery of it.
Or in recovery, right? Yeah. Yes. Because I could probably, like during COVID, there was absolutely an uptick and I upped my medication. Then I was able to, after a while, decrease the medication. So you're right. It will always be there. But I don't think there's that many people who are very, very out of control and are now in control. That's a better word for it.
Hmm.
And I also am, both patient and researcher, and I did the fMRI machine. So I feel like I'm a good spokesperson for it. And until it's recognized, they need a spokesperson. So
Hmm. I agree. I mean, yeah, you'd make perfect spokesperson. You're, like I said, one of the pioneers. I mean,
yeah,
you did research papers with the guy that gave it a name even. So
yeah.
yeah,
I
that's
mean, I
pretty
guess I
good.
would just, I have other issues right now going on in my life with medical health, and it's like, why
Hmm.
am I focusing on something that like is not a problem anymore for me? But I just for the masses of people like behind me who still need help, and I think there's 39 million views on the hashtag maladaptive daydreaming on TikTok. I mean, the numbers are high, of young girls, and it breaks my heart. They tell their parents laugh at them, like, no one thinks it's a real thing. So until like those young people, can get help, I feel like I have to keep continuing to speak out.
Is it mostly girls?
Uh, no, I've heard from young men too. I think I've heard from both, but I think the young women, the girls, are more likely to reach out, I
Hmm.
think,
Hmm.
but I do think it's both. I've heard from both, but I hear more from girls, but I think they're more likely to reach out.
Hmm. Interesting.
And I mean, they want help because they track me down from like, this was an Atlantic article, but like, people find my personal email, they find my LinkedIn, they find my work email. Like people work hard to find me, and that's because, when they go to a therapist, they're not going to get validated.
Hmm. What? So, is there any other treatment other than medication?
I mean, because it's not officially recognized, there's no treatment studies even, right?
Hmm.
So even they don't even know what medication works to treat MD. What they did for me and what they do for others is it almost never goes alone, right? So like with me, there's also OCD, and getting on an SSRI for OCD got my daydreaming under control. But other people have tried the same medication and it didn't work, right? So if you have it, so the goal is to treat like the other treatment. So if it's social anxiety, like, you need to get treatment for that. And it doesn't always work for everyone. And until it's recognized, we're not going to have great treatment studies. There has been, Dr. Sommer has looked at, has done some small treatment studies and has found things like, mindfulness, right? Like if you're really paying attention to everything in your moment, you're not daydreaming, right? Um, Types of cognitive behavioral therapy have shown some progress. Um, but it's, because it's not officially recognized, there's no like, this is like the definite treatment. One thing I recommend people who say they keep trying and just can't do it, I try to say, shift the focus. So instead of saying, okay, tomorrow I'm going to daydream less, instead, you're going to say, tomorrow I'm going to be present, right? So
Hmm.
pick a half hour of the day where you are not going to daydream and you're going to do A, B, and C. And the next day, make that an hour. And the next, like, so focus on the time once you have everything done you need to do, if you spend 8 hours in real life with friends and school, once you've done that, then you can daydream. But like increase the amount of time that you're spending in real life, I think is a less scary way to look at it. But some people are going to need medication and therapy and, all those things.
So it sounds like for me, I thought my addictions and my anxiety were the cause of a lot of my problems. Whereas now that I've been diagnosed with ADHD, I think they were more of a symptom of my ADHD. So it sounds kind of similar. Like there's you can treat maladaptive daydreaming, but it's probably a bigger thing that's causing you to go there. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, there's a big question about like, is it even its own disorder or is it a symptom of many disorders? So, for example, insomnia, right? Insomnia is its own thing,
Hmm.
but you're also going to get insomnia if you're anxious or you're depressed or all sorts of things. Dr. Sommer, I think, is fairly confident that it is its own entity. Doesn't mean it's not part of other things as well. But remembering that people are born with this trait and don't have it turn maladaptive, you got to work on what was it that made it maladaptive for you, right? Like, because I do know people who, as I mentioned, two family members. One loves to watch Shameless, although I guess that's over. But like Shameless for an hour every night before they go to sleep, and it helps them fall asleep. Whereas with me, if I had like watched an episode of a show in my head before I sleep, I would have been up all night, right? So, it's about getting it under control and getting, I think, some of those coexisting conditions. But the brain is a bit like that. It's non-scientific, but it is like a computer. Like I needed those daydreams as a child, right? I had a learning disability. I had health issues that no one believed. My siblings were way older than me. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was lonely. I needed those daydreams then. But what I thought was weird is when I was in like college and law school, like I didn't need the same type of affirmations that I would have in childhood. And yet the daydreams kept coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just once your brain gets like circulate, like once your brain is used to that for years and years and years, it's hard to stop. And in my case, I think I really needed the medication. I know people who didn't need medication, and I know of people who medication didn't work for. But for me, I needed something to stop that like obsessive circle in my brain.
Mm-hmm. I interviewed a lady quite a while back about OCD, and I'm intrigued what if you two talked. She actually came up with her own therapy modality. Really, it's called RIPR or IIPR therapy, and it helps with not just OCD but any kind of compulsions and stuff. But yeah, I'm kind of curious what her thoughts are on this.
Well, that would be interesting. What is it? It's not EMDR. It's
No,
what is it? No, IR.
RIP-R.
Okay,
And she's the creator of this therapy, and she also like teaches other mental health professionals it and stuff. And I'm not exactly sure what, I can't remember. It was a while ago I did the interview, but I can't exactly remember what the difference is between her treatment and someone else's. But
I mean, there's just so few treatment options with MD. I mean, I get so many emails, and I just don't know what to tell people. Like I send them to Dr. Sommer's site. I do talk to parents of kids who, whose children are doing it. I mean, there I often say, don't make a big deal of it, because some, if the kid's pacing and daydreaming, like it looks weird and it gets the parents and teachers all freaked out.
yeah.
The reality is that child might not end up with MD, right? They could grow out of it. They could use that imagination to fuel creative pursuits, right? Because just because they're walking around in circles doesn't mean that it's maladaptive, right? The maladaptive piece is if you can't have relationships and you're not, you're not achieving. So I find it a little frustrating. I don't know if I'm allowed to criticize medical establishments here, but
Sure.
I find you could cut it out if it's bad, but it troubles me that there is a treatment program at Johns Hopkins for what they call stereotypic movement disorder, which is kids who do repetitive movements. So like, the rocking, the handshaking, the pacing,
stimming or whatever it is.
Yeah. But what bothers me is a lot of those kids are daydreaming, and they're not asking. It's all about stopping the motion, not what's going on in the head. And in my experience, when I did it with emotion, I don't think it was a problem, right? Because I did it like when no one else was around, when I was bored, right? As soon as a friend came over, I would stop.
Mm-hmm.
It was when I learned how to do it sitting still that I could do it all day, every day. And I think it's funny that children who don't need to be treated, right? They might grow up to either, grow out of it or not become maladaptive, right? It can be adaptive. So they're being overtreated because stereotypic movement disorder is in the DSM. But adults who actually say, no, this is ruining my life, I keep getting fired, or divorced or whatever, they can't get treated because they're told there's no such thing, because it's all about what's in the DSM.
Hmm. Interesting.
which is really upsetting to me.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very complicated, isn't it? Because,
it's
I mean,
yeah,
the research they're doing there is maybe working for some people so they think they're on the right track. But yeah, you're right. It's like it could be a whole other reason why people are bobbing their head up and down for 2 hours straight. And yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think way into that work, someone decided to ask the kids what they were doing, and a lot of them said imagining. So like, but like they're focusing on the movement without even asking the kid what they're thinking about, which I just think is so backward and shows our society is about what other people think look weird as opposed to what someone inside is telling you. I was speaking to one young woman from Canada, a TikToker who's
That's where I
done
am.
a great job. Yeah, you're where in Canada?
uh, a town called Indian Head in the province of Saskatchewan.
I have no idea where that is, but that sounds cool.
I'm about
Uh,
3 hours north of Minot.
uh, yeah, well, I love Canada. In fact, I'd like to move there these days. But anyway, as an aside, so I'm talking to this young woman from Canada who's done a great job to bring awareness to maladaptive daydreaming. So she's gone to doctor, mentioned the maladaptive daydreaming. Everybody told her, not a problem, right? Well, once she taped herself rocking back and forth while daydreaming and videoed it, then she brought it to the doctors. And then they're like, oh, something's here, right?
Hmm.
But it's just based on what people think is abnormal instead of what's really happening. And right, the movement in and of itself is not a problem. I have family members who move, they have wonderful lives, it doesn't bother them, right? It's about the degree of compulsion in one's head. But human beings are like, oh, I don't know what this rocking's weird, okay, something's wrong with you. But
Hmm.
someone just nicely saying like, look, I feel like I'm exhausted, I'm having trouble keeping up with two worlds, they don't pay any attention to,
Hmm. Yeah,
you
that's
know.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I did a bit of Googling and I've seen a few YouTube videos and stuff and a few interviews, and it was like, because I didn't quite get it at first, right? I was like, what? What's the problem here, too?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and I put myself back when I was a teenager. It's like, I used to do that. I just grew out of it. And then, yeah, and then it's like, oh, their lives are crumbling around them because they can't do anything other than
Yeah.
daydream.
I think part of the problem is, and Dr. Sommer and I agree, is that the word daydreaming isn't so great because everybody daydreams. That's a pretty innocuous activity. These are like filled fantasy worlds, like with plots and some people do research before they go into their daydreams. Like this is constructed fantasy, not daydreaming. And we're going to keep the word daydreaming because it's what's all over the internet. But reality, I think, when you tell someone you have a problem with daydreaming, I think they're not going to take it seriously. Whereas if you say, look, I have these imaginary fantasy worlds and I prefer them to anything else. I mean, that's what actually when I advise someone to trying to get them to take them seriously, I advise them to say that.
Hmm.
But then you also don't want them to think you're like off the deep end. So you say, I know these worlds aren't real, but they're taking up more and more of my time and it's getting in the way of my real life. But I try to avoid using the word daydreaming. Walking in, because also doctors don't like to be giving a diagnosis. So if you walk in and say, I'm maladaptive daydreaming, they're going to be like, well, there's no such thing. I've got the DSM in front of me. So it's better to like explain what this is.
Hmm.
Interestingly, for my life, it's, so for it to be maladaptive, you have to show that there's like a, impairment in real life. And I think you could say I'm a close call because it didn't interfere with my like academic vocational success. I've had problems with relationships, but not because of that. Um, not so great at romantic relationships, but I have plenty of like deep friendships. So like in my life, it might be hard to find what that interference is. But having lived both ways, and like I said, I still enjoy daydreaming, but the feeling of it being under control, it feels like there's so much weight on me. Like I was just exhausted. I was never in the here present. I was always like listening to one conversation, being like, oh my God, what can I make my characters do? Then trying to check back. What did I miss there? I was like never ever in the moment, and I was exhausted. Um,
And that's fair. I mean, even when I was in addiction treatment, I knew people that drank way more than me. They were basically drunk all the time, but they lived in nice houses, drove nice cars and stuff. And I was like, I'm pretty sure they're alcoholics just because it's not ruining their life. And
yeah,
it's not, maybe, and then I'm sitting beside people who have like, they're basically hobos on the street. And I'm like, well, I still have my wife and
yeah,
kids and stuff. And, and so it's like, well, and then someone said to me, it's not what other people see, it's what it's doing to you inside. If you
yeah,
feel like you said, like if you feel like this is a problem or it's gonna be even or it's getting worse or whatever,
yeah,
then you need to be here, you need to have help. And they're like,
yeah,
it's no accident that you're here. Like no one accidentally is like, whoops, I'm in treatment.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I kind of relate a bit with that, whether it's like, okay, yeah,
yeah.
I'm not living homeless on the street daydreaming all day, but it's exhausting to
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
it's exhausting, and I feel like I'm never in the present moment. And I did have a boyfriend or two say, like, I don't think you like, you know, they would say I was very close to my nieces back then. They were young kids. They were like my daughter, and a few boyfriends were like, you seem to like care about your nieces and nephews more than me, and only always think about them. Um, it was a competition between my nieces and nephews, a boyfriend. I'm going to pick my nieces any nephew any day of the week. But that's not what he was picking up on. His competition was with hours and hours of people in my real head. Um, so yeah, so I think like for me, it didn't feel good, and having full control of it, I'm a happier person because of it.
Right.
Um, but when people say, "Oh my God, I do this, I love it," I didn't think it was a problem, and now you're telling me I have a psychiatric disorder. I'm like, no, if you liked it and it wasn't causing any problems, like if it's the first time you're asking, do I have this, is because you've seen, a video or whatever, then you probably don't, right? Like from the
Hmm.
age of 7, I knew I was different from all my friends. I kept trying to find someone else like me, and I couldn't. Like, I don't think if you didn't know until you had to watch a video, then you probably didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's fair. Yeah.
What I have seen is people knowing there's a problem, don't know what it is, don't know how to explain it. Then they see the TikTok video and they're like, "Oh my God, you answered my question." That's very different from never thinking it was a problem and seeing a video.
Hmm. Right. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, again, I can relate because I learned a bit about it and I was like, yeah, I did feel good. I liked it. I still
Yeah.
like it, but I don't run to the bathroom when I'm out for supper to continue it.
Yeah.
But yeah. Huh. Yeah. So it's a lot like, I guess, pretty much any other compulsion, really,
Yeah.
which
I think,
makes sense. I mean,
yeah,
you can compulse on anything. So why not daydreaming in your own fantasies and stuff?
exactly. I mean, I think that, I mean, we don't love to use the word just because scientifically, I don't know, it has what needs to be proven for something to be an addiction or something. But
Right.
Dr. Soam and I both feel like it's an addiction. I once had an interview ask me because they asked like one of the reasons you have it is you can't control it. And so the interviewer was like, does that mean like it comes into your head, like not on your own volition? And I was like, no, it's my own volition, right? But it's kind of like when I'm dieting and we put an ice cream sundae in front of me, I could say no, but it's in front of me and I might not, right? So it's like it is in my control, but it takes a lot of willpower
Right.
and you just might not have it.
So another thing I was told about addiction, and maybe this relates, is 80% of the addiction is actually thinking about it, planning it, wondering when you can do it again, getting excited to be able to do it again. And the 20% of the addiction is actually sitting there doing it, right? Is that comparative?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I got to the point where I did it all day, every day. So it was like in seconds, it was like, okay, I got to listen here now. Now I can take a break and listen there now. But for sure, like, I mean, people, especially the people who need movement, can't do it as easily, but they spend time researching, right? They research things for their plots and their characters. And they're like, oh my God, I can't wait for the workday to be over so I can get home. And that's the only thing you're thinking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I would used to say too is like, it's one thing if you like, you can like something, but the first thing you think of when you get in the morning is launch right into it. I mean, I remember that in high school. Get up in the morning and launch right into a daydream. Whole time I was getting dressed and getting ready, I would like slip on the school bus, trying not to sit near my friends. So I'd be daydreaming on the way to school. And then when I got there and I had to talk to a friend, I was like mad, right? Like that doesn't happen right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how addicts behave, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think someone who just likes daydreaming behaves that way.
Mm-hmm. It's
It's always,
a little
yeah,
different with like drug and booze because you can like you feed off each other sometimes too. It's like
yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
it would be different, I guess, if you and friends got together and
yeah. That's true. This
had the
is
same fantasy. But yeah, but I understand. But like for me, my last bit of addiction use was I isolated. I was no longer going to parties and bars. I was sitting in my garage by myself because I didn't want to be around like addicts. I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I want to
yeah,
enjoy it the way I want to enjoy it. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, our brains are so complicated, and life is so hard. So what we end up doing to cope can turn out to be not healthy.
Yeah.
And once you're used to it, it's very difficult to break. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's
Like I said, it does serve a purpose, but when it's no longer that purpose is gone and it's just consuming you. Yeah.
Yep. And if you still have the purpose, then get help on that purpose, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I just got an email from someone yesterday. He's got panic attacks, social anxiety, and MD. And I'm like, you know what? Let's treat the MD last, since no one knows what it is or how to treat it. Like, work on this stuff. Like, there's plenty of people who know how to help you with social anxiety and panic attacks. And then if the MD is still there, then then look specifically at the MD.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. Like I said, it breaks my heart that there's really not that much help. But at least when I was in college, if I wasn't daydreaming, I was like searching psychology databases. We didn't have the internet. That's how old I am. We
Mm.
didn't have the internet. So I'm searching psychology databases, looking for things like the pacing and spinning while daydreaming, looking for daydreaming addiction, looking for addiction to TV show in your head, because I kind of felt like I was addicted to General Hospital for a while, but then the show changed. So it's not really, you know, nothing exists.
Mm.
And it makes me happy today that all you have to do is type a few words into Google, and there's a lot there. I mean, however many years ago, you would find my Atlantic article and that's it. But now you find there's a lot there, and there's chat rooms. So people like aren't alone. And that I think is really good to hear. And I'm hoping in the next couple of years, not only will they not be alone, but that there'll be some treatment studies. But we
Mm-hmm.
do need to raise awareness. And I'm not sure how we do that.
Well,
Oh,
you seem to be doing it.
yes. Yes. Doing it. But
Uh,
you know, it's taken off like on the internet, but it's not, again, it's not being taught to medical professionals or therapists and I guess it won't be until it's in the DSM. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you need a doctor to have it to really get it or something. I don't know.
I mean, Dr. Sommer doesn't have it, but
Yeah.
he's a big advocate. But I think, and he's very conscious of this. Like for the longest time, he was the only one, and so I think that might make it harder to get in the DSM, right? Because I think it's one person with a biased agenda. So now he's recruited researchers from around the world. So I mean, I think one day it will be in the DSM. But what do you do between now and then? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. What do people do? Like, if you can't convince your doctor, can you just ask them? Do you lie to them to get an SSRI?
I mean, what I recommend is, like I said, almost everybody has something else, right? And people with MD, I don't know if I've met anyone who didn't have somewhere else. So I
Hmm.
would start there. I would tell them about the daydreaming, right? So a few people told me like they never even told their therapist. I'm like, oh my God, that's the point of going to therapy, right? Like, I also, if you are going to bring up MD with a therapist or doctor, and you should, bring them articles, right? So they know it's not some just from TikTok, right? The Atlantic is a pretty good source, right? You
Hmm.
can read my article in the Atlantic, which is on my website. There's also a bunch of peer reviewed medical journal articles show the doctors a few of those so they see that there's real science behind it. And if they're not willing to read those articles or take you seriously, find another doctor because you will be able to find one. Now, once the doctor reads about it, they're still not going to know what to do because there are not a lot of treatment studies, although I think on Dr. Sommer's website, he's had a few small studies. But then, the doctor could say, okay, you have this, but you also have all the other things. Let's work on the other things first. Because that's what, my doctor gave me medication for OCD and that helped get rid of the daydreaming.
Mm-hmm.
So if you work on someone else's social anxiety, that could help get rid of the daydreaming. But you still want to tell them. And if they don't want to listen, they don't believe you, find someone else.
Do you mind emailing me some links that you think would be
Yeah.
helpful for some people? Then I'll put it in my show notes when this comes out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, because we have, I put together a webpage really for that purpose with all the empirical articles, so that people could show those pages to their doctors. And then we also have a newsletter where it's written by people with MD for people with MD. It only comes out 4 times a year, but I have the back issues posted. But it has some helpful things like how to be a good student despite MD, right? There are ways to do it. It's hard, but there are ways to do it. How to tell your family about MD. There's also just profiles of different community members, and I think it helps people feel less alone. So I'll send you the links to those as well.
Awesome. Yeah.
So,
is there anything else I didn't ask that you want people to know?
No, I want them to know that it almost always gets better, right? Especially it's often worse than those high school to college years. And I know a lot of successful people with MD, right? You either will find a way to overcome it completely, or you learn a way to work around it. So, I'm not saying it's not a struggle, and I'm not saying you should not get help. I'm not saying you should not try to work on it, but in the end, I think most people are going to be okay with some effort, right? And reach out to those, there's a Discord, reach out to those groups so you don't feel as alone, and volunteer for them, right? Or if you volunteer to write an article for the newsletter, while you're writing that article, you're not daydreaming, right? So volunteer to do stuff, I guess, increase your responsibilities in real life, because that's going to prevent you at least daydreaming from that period of day. And then my last advice is to parents. Don't freak out. Don't tell your kid not to do it. I've heard parents forbid their kids to do it. It does not work. You cannot do that, right? You can't tell someone just to stop something. Read about it, learn about it, understand that they could grow out of it and it could be a good thing. Ask them if it bothers them. If it bothers them, that's when you maybe seek out some sort of therapy. But don't, just because your kid is spinning in circles and daydreaming, that is not necessarily a bad thing. Don't make them feel bad about it.
Thank you so much, Jayne. That was amazing. I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. I hope that if you have suffered with this or are suffering with this, you're able to get a hold of Jayne and go into the show notes there. She sent me a bunch of links, and I'm going to put those there. And you can start getting some help. So last week's episode was with Big Daddy Taz live at the Grand Theater here in Indian Head, and we were talking to some high school students. We took a bunch of questions from students, but there's probably a good 15 or 20 questions we could not get to. And we had students, Taz had this great idea that students can anonymously send their questions to an email account, and then his wife read them from the audience. But the ones he couldn't get to live, he went back to his hotel room and he responded to every one of them, which is amazing. Taz did get one email from a student, which was, I think it was from a student. I guess it could have been from anybody from the audience. It was a very concerning email. They talked about having a plan to harm themselves and whatnot. So Taz obviously told staff of the school and stuff, and he responded to that person, of course. And just the other day, Taz sent me a message, which was a screenshot of that person responding back to Taz. And it says, "Hi, thanks for replying. After sending my last email, I discussed my suicidal thoughts with my parents and began seeing a therapist, which has helped a lot. I just want to thank you for the presentation you and Todd did at the Grand Theater. It really helped me admit to myself that I needed help, and it was okay to ask for it. Your show inspired me to get the help I need and to start taking care of myself. I just want you to know that you and your kindness profoundly changed my life for the better, and I'll never forget you for it." Oh, that's incredible. I'm so proud of Taz. I'm so happy to know him and for him to be able to come and talk to students and to help them when they reach out to him. It's incredible. That's when he sent me that. My eyes were welling up with tears, and I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to read it here without getting emotional, so I just read it as quickly as I could. But anyway, this is kind of the whole point of this podcast. I've said this, for the last quite a few weeks. It's to get people help. It's to have people realize that they're not alone, that we're normalizing a lot of this stuff to end stigma, and to just get help, to let people know it's okay, and to that you're normal. Anyway, I'm getting a little rambly, but I'm very passionate about this podcast, and I think if you are passionate about mental health, if you think people could benefit from listening to a lot of these guests that I have, please, I beg you, tell people you know about the podcast. You never know who you're going to help, who might benefit from listening to some random episode. You just never ever know. So yes, please tell at least 3 people this week. No, you know what? Tell 5 people this week about this podcast, and we'll start a revolution here. Anyway, I want to thank people for comments. I keep getting lots of comments on Instagram and stuff. I appreciate it very much. So if you want to leave a comment or you want to follow the podcast at all, on Facebook, it's Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. On Instagram, it's Bunny Hugs Podcast. And on TikTok, it's Bunny Hugs Podcast. And I'm always posting memes and things about guests. And if I'm doing any speaking or any, engagements or events or anything, I put that stuff up. So please check that out. And really quick, if you go to youthmatter.ca, there's Teen Talk Tuesdays. You can sign up for those if you have some youths in your home and they could benefit from listening to some talks on mental health. They can sign up there and listen to some talks virtually right from your home. And that would be really great. That's Teen Talk Tuesday on youthmatter.ca. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but oh well, I guess I forgot something. You know what? I never forget though, and I don't want you to ever forget. Please don't forget to make your beds and take your meds. Bye.